This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the first official episode of This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice applies to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. And on this podcast, I talk with restorative justice practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives. When I thought about starting this podcast, I immediately knew who the first guest had to be. Cheryl Marie Graves is a girl from the south side of Chicago who stumbled into restorative justice at just the right time. Since learning the work, she's become one of Chicago's godmothers, not grandmothers, of restorative justice. Cheryl has brought restorative justice and peace circles to thousands across the city, the country, and the world. It took some convincing, but I'm so glad she agreed to be the first guest on this podcast because she and the late great Ora Shub were some of my first teachers in this work. It's been such a privilege to get to learn from and work alongside her in this work over the past few years. Since I've moved across the country, I don't get to talk to her nearly enough, but every time I do, I'm always blessed by the wisdom from her stories. This is hopefully the first of many conversations we'll get to share together on this podcast, but for now, I'm really excited for you to hear how she got into the work and some of the lessons she's learned along the way. Enjoy this conversation with Cheryl Marie Graves. Welcome, Cheryl. Who are you?
Oh my goodness. I'm a girl from the South Side who stumbled into restorative justice just at the right time. That's who I am.
Who are you?
A girl from the South Side who stumbled into RJ, who really, really, really loves sitting in circle and tending to my plants.
Who are you?
I am somebody who is very nervous about this podcast.
Who are you?
I'm somebody who's not as nervous about the podcast because you're making me laugh and I can see your face and it's beautiful. That's who I am.
Who are you?
I'm somebody who actually, I guess, is going to be kind of grateful that we're doing this podcast. Ultimately.
Who are you?
I am Cheryl Marie Graves, the daughter of Bertha and Jack, and the granddaughter of Beulah Prudence Graves and John Lewis Graves. That's who I am.
One more time. Who are you?
A woman who is learning not to be afraid, to step up, really step up and step out for what I believe in.
Thank you. Thank you for being here despite all the fear. It took a little bit to get you on here, but I'm really, really glad that you decided that it was worth it to be on this very first episode of This Restorative Justice Life. But it's always good to just check in, especially in these times. So how are you?
I am up and down. Very much concerned about the state of all my people, both family and comrades and community and folks who are in the streets really trying to make a difference and not wanting them to get hurt, but knowing how important it is for folks to be in the streets. And so I'm personally taking my immune busting concoction that my good friend in Jamaica told me to make with lots of turmeric and aloe and, ginger and cayenne and really good stuff. And I am alive and actually pretty well. So very convoluted answer, but that's how I am. How are you, David?
I am, all things considered, well. It's really exciting for me that I'm not going back to work as an X-ray tech until October 9. You and I have
What?
conversations offline outside of this
Yeah.
podcast, but I've been doing a lot of work as an X-ray tech, almost the entire time that you've known me, really for the last almost 9 years. Wow, getting old.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm starting to decrease that so I can spend more time doing this. So I'm really excited about that. And like doing this work with Amplify RJ is a lot. So just trying to keep all the balls in the air, and I think like balancing the business side with the relationships is always a tough tension. I had a really good conversation with a couple of folks who have been a part of this community for a while last night about, how do we balance bringing this work to more people, sustaining ourselves and doing it in a way that like is meaningful for us and we know to be true.
Yeah. The point you just made about sustaining ourselves is really critical. I've been doing probably more circles than I've been doing training, which is sort of the
Mm-hmm.
opposite of what it's usually been. And they're so deep, and the need to go deep is so great. And trying to hold those spaces, particularly when people are really hurt and angry, and it's just amplified by all that's going on. And I find myself in a way that I hadn't before, really having to deal with my own energy and my own feelings. And sometimes, like, I don't want to do circles anymore, right? And then I go to sleep and wake up and think, and what the hell else would you do, right? Because this is what you love to do, right? And so it is very much the yin and the yang, but it's also then knowing that you got to stay with it. It's not like it's one circle or two circles, right? It's you circle up and give people the space until they are ready to figure out what they need and how to move forward. And there's no rush in that.
Yeah, what kind of circles have you found yourself doing in these days?
Oh my God, it runs the spectrum. A lot of healing circles, some grieving circles. There have been some deaths, not so much from COVID, but from just violence in the neighborhoods that I work in. Um, but then there are also just, there's some sexual violence issues. There's some issues around homelessness and returning to family. It sort of runs the gamut. And they're deeper and they're more intense and they're longer and they're with people that I really, really care about. So I'm not doing circles for sort of people that call in and say, oh, could you do a circle? It's friends and even family saying we really need to address some of this stuff. And so it's been really challenging, really, really challenging. I've had to learn a lot. That's actually what I've had to do, right? Because as much as I know that I can't be invested in the outcomes because it's people I love, of course, I want it to go well. And I had to check myself that it's not about what I want, it's about what people need and what
Mm-hmm.
they need to say and share and get out. So,
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's not that like you're not invested in the outcomes, but like your idea of what should happen is not
exactly, exactly.
what, because I mean, you can't help but be in relationship with folks and, knowing who you are, um, that's something that makes you great. That's one of your superpowers
Is
in
it?
this work. But you didn't start having all of those superpowers. You've been doing restorative justice work probably longer than you knew what the word restorative justice were. So I'm curious where that started for you.
you know, I was thinking about that recently because I'll start again. I've been thinking about that recently because generally I talk about what I call the Aaron case, the Aaron story, right?
Hmm.
But recently I started thinking about, okay, actually, before I knew about restorative justice or anything like that, I was doing work at Spelman College and we were taking young people to rural areas so that when they signed up to get a particular kind of scholarship that said that they would, after they finished medical school or dental school, and that was going to be fully paid for by the scholarship, they would serve for another 4 years in an underserved area. And these were young people from Chicago and Philly and Detroit and LA, they thought they knew what underserved was. They didn't. They didn't know what rural meant. And so we decided collectively, myself, and other folks I was working with at those colleges, the AU Center colleges, like let's go to those places. Let's go to rural Mississippi, right, and visit the health centers where they might be working and spending 4 years of their life after school. And the last trip I made was to a little town in rural Mississippi called Mount Bayou, which is on the Mississippi Delta. And the town was so excited that Spelman and Morehouse and Clark and Morris Brown were coming. The band came out to play and the mayor greeted us. And then the mayor led us about 4 miles into the woods to this health center, this health clinic. And there were little babies running around, beautiful babies with these distended bellies. And I knew that represented some kind of waterborne illness. But the students were just like, oh my God, this is scary and amazing. And then one of the things that the mayor said to us was, it really does have to do with some waterborne diseases. And that's because we don't. And then he stopped himself. He said, you know what? Let me not tell you, let me show you. So we were on this little bus. So he had our little bus follow his big car. And we drove out to this community that was all these new 3-bedroom brick homes, right? Maybe like a mile or two away from this healthcare center. And the woman opened the door and she greeted us with literally a pan of cookies. And we all went in and we walked around. It's a beautiful house. And then the mayor said, could you turn on the water for us? And her face fell. And she said, come on, I can't turn the water on. And he said, could you just let them see what comes out? And nothing came out. And then he said, can you show them where you use the bathroom? And it turned out in her backyard was a matching brick outhouse. And that's because this new community didn't have any water. They used well water, right? Because, we were also disturbed by that, but I had a longer conversation afterwards with the mayor. And he said, there's a city line, a town line, and the white city fathers on the other side of that line, they won't give us a license so that we can get the water main extended across it so we can connect up and we can get in water. And I was horrified. I'm like, what are you talking about? They won't let you do that. He said, I said, well, what do you need to make that happen? And he said, well, we need some good lawyers to come down here and sue them. And I said, well, have you been talking to them? They won't talk to us. We got to sue them. And we need some people to come and help us do that. And so I went back, we went back to Atlanta, went back to Spelman. And the phone rings and it's my best friend from Chicago who calls and says, I decided to go to law school. I'm like, what? And she said, yeah, you should come home and go too. I'm like, you're crazy. And I did. I came back home. But in my head, the reason why I went to law school was always because of the outhouses in the backyards of those people. And I say that connects to restorative justice because there was no possibility of them winning a case technically. It would have to be about relationships being established. And I shouldn't say there's no way they're winning a case, but it would have been long and drawn out. And ultimately the mayor said, he called me at one point and said, I decided to just go talk to those people. And we took a whole bunch we took cookies and we took food and we said, let's just sit down and talk about this because our people can't continue to live like this. And so, yes, the law has its place, definitely, thank God, but so does what I've come to learn of as how about relationships and restorative justice, and really how do you get people to understand that there are more connections and more meaningful relationships between us than we can imagine. So that was a long roundabout answer. So, okay, I'm done.
So I didn't know all that because you're right. Like normally your restorative justice story starts off with Aaron, who you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that background. But you went to law school.
Yeah.
And then what?
Well, I hated law school. Absolutely hated it. The whole idea that we're supposed to be thinking like a reasonable man, and that generally meant a reasonable white man. So that was so out of, like, what the hell does that mean? And, one day I'm driving home crying, literally driving, crying. And I had to pull over because I was crying so hard. And I ended up pulling over right across the street from where just happened to be the legal assistance office, right? And these wonderful guys that ran the newspaper stand said, I kept saying, the law, there wasn't wrong with you, the law, I hate the law. And they said, oh, no, just go across the street, they'll help you, they'll help you. I'm like, no, 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 no. And they said, whatever it is, just go over across the street, go up those steps, and they'll help you. And I just needed to blow my nose and use the bathroom at that point. So I went across the street and went up the steps, and there was Elaine who let me in, and she starts being so nice to me. So I'm crying again. It's like the law, the law. She said, don't worry, the woman on duty today, she's gonna help you. And and I'm like, I just can't stand it. She said, I know it is so bad. So she brings me tea, and I sit in our way, and there comes out this little, not little, this white woman with these bouncy red curls, and she's bopping in and says, hi, how are you? And I'm like, this is not who I want to be talking to. You look like everybody in my law school class. And she said, oh, but trust me, I'm not. And so she said, come on back and talk to me about what's going on. And so, I'm still blowing my nose and tears are flowing. And I walk back to her office, and she brings me a cup of tea, and she says, okay, what's up? I said, I hate law school. She said, well, I hope so. She said, anybody with any sense wouldn't like it. It's really not meant for people who have social consciousness. And so she said, so what's going on? And so I told her, I said, there's nothing that relates to anything I care about. And she said, what do you want to do? I said, I need to work. I need to be with people. I didn't come to law school to sit and study these stupid ass topics. And she said, good. She said, what do you want? I said, I want to work. She said, okay, fine. You want to work for me? I'm like, okay, what would that mean? And she said, well, she named the kind of cases she was doing. I said, that sounds fantastic. I said, but they tell you can't work your first year. And she said, and you're going to listen to them? And I'm like, well, she said, I said, no, I'm not listening to them. Forget them. No, 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 no. So she said, okay, fine. She said, do you have $100? I'm like, I have to pay you to work for you? And she said, no, the case that we have is a really serious domestic violence case. And the husband has already firebombed my mailbox. And so I may just get held in contempt of court and need you to bail me out. So I need you to have $100 in cash. Do you have? I said, yes, I can bring $100. Okay, fine. So that bouncy, curly, red-haired woman totally changed my life. That just happened to be Aura Shub, whose T-shirt you're wearing right now, and I'm happy to see that, David. But she and the other attorneys at Legal Assistance represented all that I wanted to be. Really staunch advocates. I mean, really going the total extra mile for your client, really listen to what your client wanted and needed. So it wasn't just about the case, it was about the person. And I just learned that it's not a practice of law. It's about being in relationship with people that you care about, and you care about their issues, but you can't just be the person to carry it. You have to inform them so that they're learning as much as you know, so that the next time they can lift up somebody else. And that's what I learned, that if you're going to be a good lawyer, then you have to instill as much information and agency in your client, as you have. So.
Yeah. You brought her up before I did. And I don't think I've ever heard that story about when you first met. So that was, see, we're doing this for me and for the people. And so you continue to work with Aura. And for those of you who don't know who Aura Shub is, Aura has been, for a very long time, Cheryl's partner with this in this work, not just as a lawyer, but as a circle keeper and a restorative justice practitioner. She passed away 2.5 years ago at this point. We'll come back to her in a little bit. But talk about
what
happened after law school. How did you all continue to work together?
So they hired me on at legal assistance as one of the attorneys there. And so I ended up being there for 6 years after law school. Um, and it was only, and I have to say that these attorneys and legal assistants were so kick ass. I mean, there was one point where the folks in landlord tenant court, the judges got so upset with them that they decided that they were going to demand, they told everybody that came in to demand trial on all their cases. All the landlords they wanted them to demand trial because they thought they were just BSing them to stall for time, right? And so they ended up in 1 month literally having 22 jury trials, all right, which was unheard of, right? And that's because the judges thought they would just end up folding, and they didn't. They tried every single case before a jury. There were 3 attorneys: Sharon Pitts, Ora Shube, and Marilyn Johnson. And I'm telling you, they kicked butt, and I think they won all but 2 cases, and the other 2 settled. And it was just like, see, you think because we represent poor people, we don't count. Like, we're not as good as, we whip their butts. They whip their butts. And so those 6 years taught me that, it taught me a lot. And one of the things that I also emphasized, because our clientele mostly with people who lived in public housing communities, Robert Taylor Homes, Stateway Gardens, and up and down the State Street corridor. And what we decided was it wasn't enough just for, as I said, just to represent them. So we identified certain ones of those clients who really could be advocates within the public housing sector. So we trained them in certain areas of law. And so they had monthly legal sessions in the laundry room, or outside in the big area, where anybody who was interested or anybody that had something going on and wanted information, they weren't lawyers, they weren't legal workers, but they were really, as in some ways, better than we were at communicating. This is what you need to do to be proactive, right? This is what you need to do to protect yourself. These are the documents you need to have. So anyway, so I felt like I had learned so much from them, but I wanted to do more trial work. So I went to the public defender's office, and I was there for a couple of years. I was there until I had this was just about a bond. This judge I was in front of, he would give people $1 million bonds. We're talking about, instead of an I bond, they named the bond after him, a marbly bond. Anyway, so this young man came in, a simple
Sorry, for
case.
those of you who don't know, an I bond, you can come back on your own reconnaissance.
Right.
And these bonds, like, you have to pay, I think it's a tenth, right?
Right.
So it's $1 million. You're paying 100,000.
Right.
Yeah.
But on an I bond, basically you just walk, and it's basically I promise to come back.
Right.
So you don't have to pay for the I. Right. And so, but the paperwork still had to be done. Right. Okay. So I heard that case at maybe 8:45 in the morning, got him an I bond. I said, just wait. He was there with his mother, his father, his baby, his girlfriend, the whole family came. At 10:30, he approached me and said, we're still here. I'm like, okay, let me check on it. I went back. Clerk said, I'll get it. 1:00. No, I went back. Nobody. So finally, I ended up talking to the clerk. She was doing her nails, didn't have time to get to it, said she'd get to it in a little bit. So I go talk to the judge, and I said, Judge, what is up with this? You signed that I bond at 8:45 this morning. This man is going to, he'll be taken to Cook County Jail if he doesn't get the paperwork. And the judge looked at me, and he said, Cheryl, you're a good lawyer. I said, thank you. I'm worried about my client right now. He said, but let me just say something. He said, I think you're going to wear yourself out. He said, just remember this. He said, people get what they pay for, and what do your clients pay you? And obviously, as a public defender, my clients did not pay me. And so basically, he was saying they get what they pay for, right? I was horrified. This judge had been a former public defender, right? And the thought that it didn't matter what kind of service or, how this man was treated. So I remember, I think I quit like maybe 3 days after that. Like, no, can't do this anymore. And so I went to Access Living. Just turned out Ora was at Access Living, which is a disability rights organization. And their motto was nothing about us without us. And It was so powerful. I learned so much from people who people would consider to be disabled. They may have physical disabilities or mental disabilities, but the heart and the advocacy spirit and the knowing that if we don't stand up, nobody will. I watched those people turn the community around. It became an accessible neighborhood. We were right off of Greektown in Chicago. Um, but I also learned about a fighting spirit that was also a very loving spirit, because they were advocating. And I watched them pull wheelchairs up in front of the CTA buses, right, and sit there. I watched them block traffic. Anyway. So just know. So I was doing housing discrimination work. Well, not discrimination work, but trying to stop the discrimination, right? And so basically, we would go out and people who weren't letting people with disabilities move in, and we would do testing, send somebody who was not disabled in first, and the people say, "Oh, sure, we have places," and then we would go and, "Oh no, there's no place," and but the goal was not necessarily to sue them. The goal was to teach them how they can make their place accessible, right? And we had architects that were available. We had all kinds of people to support them. And once people knew they didn't have to cost them an arm and a leg and that they could get some really good tenants, we were able to open up the housing. Anyway, long story short of that is that there was a 640 unit building that was actually not far from where I lived. And tenants came from that place saying that it was totally inaccessible for all kinds of reasons, and could we support the tenants and making it accessible? Long story short, my position was paid for through a grant from HUD. It turned out that the landlord at that point was HUD, and so we ended up suing the entity that paid my salary. And so basically what they did was they ended the program. Well, they ended me. So they stopped paying. Anyway, so then after that, I ended up in Northwestern. And that's where I truly learned that a lot of the spirit and the heart of the legal work I wanted to do was what I learned at Legal Assistance with Aura, and what I learned at Access Living with those people that taught me so much about standing up when you couldn't walk, right? Um, and and so I bumped into Aaron. Finally, Aaron appears in my life. And Aaron is the younger brother of a guy I was representing in a really serious matter. Aaron would come along to all the interviews because we always engaged our students in the cases we were working on, obviously. And just know, as part of the Jesus Christ, the Children and Family Justice Center, which was started and run by Bernadine Dorn, who is one of the most amazing kick-ass women I've ever met in my entire life. She was actually part of the Weatherman Underground way back in the day, and how she worked her way into Northwestern is a whole nother story I won't share right now. But at any rate, and so Bernadine's thing was, okay, so how do we demonstrate what, good holistic representation is for young people, right? So Aaron would come with his older brother all the time. And at the end of every interview, Aaron was very sweet. And he would say to me, "Miss Graves, thank you so much. And just know you will never, ever have to represent me. Don't you worry about that." And of course, not of course, it ended up that about 3 months after that, the mother called and said, "Cheryl, can you come to court on Tuesday?" I'm like, "Oh my God, what happened to Tony?" And she said, "No, it's not Tony, it's Aaron. He got into a fight at a video arcade." I'm like, "Aaron?" She said, "Yes, Aaron." She said, "He said you would say that." Aaron, what? And so I said, "Sure. I'll be in court anyway. I'll stop by and see what's going on. What do you need?" Get there, and I see her talking and laughing with this woman, and I look around and I see Aaron, and he's in the back sitting, because juvenile court in Chicago could be packed to the gills. Looked like somebody was giving out toys at Christmas, except it wasn't Christmas. And it's all Black faces for the most part, Black and brown faces. And so I see Aaron, and so he's, in one of the back seats, and he's having a good time talking to this other young man. And so I'm getting a little pissed off, like, you're not supposed to come to court and be happy and giddy and seeing people you know. Well, it turned out his mother was talking to the mother of the little boy who Aaron had gotten into the fight with, and Aaron was talking to the little boy he had gotten into the fight with. So basically, they already had some kind of forged some relationship. So I went and I talked to the mother, and she said, I'm so sorry. My son has some mild disabilities, and when he gets to the video arcades, he has trouble playing the games. And so he sort of stands in front of the machines. Aaron, as it turned out, was behind him, and just got really frustrated and sort of mildly pushed him because he thought my son was just trying to just hog the machine. And it turned out that I ended up being called. I didn't even see Aaron. Aaron had already been arrested. They'd called in the security guard had called the police to come in and arrest him. But when we got home, we, based upon my son's description that he felt like he knew him from church, we went to the church book, and lo and behold, there's Aaron and his mom in the church book. So it turned out that they had a long-standing relationship. And so I said, it would be great if we could just talk about what you would like to see happen. Because when I went to talk to the state's attorney, her whole thing was, that boy pushed a boy who's retarded. And she yelled it so loud, and she's pointing over to the little boy. And I was horrified, like, really? This is how you protect the quote unquote victims that you were supposed to be representing? Anyway, a few days later, they went over to the house, and they sat down around a pot of stew at a kitchen table. And Aaron said, he said, I thought you were just fronting me off. I've been standing there for like 15, 20 minutes. You weren't doing anything. And then Joey starts crying. Little boy starts crying. And he said, that's because I don't know how to play. I go there with my cousins. They think I'm stupid. They think I'm retarded. And I just like the sounds and the noise and the lights, but I don't know how to play any of the games. And so Aaron said, well, I'm not the smartest, person, but I can show you how to do that. So anyway, that Saturday, before the court date, they went to the video arcade together. And as it turned out, Joey left being able to play like 5 of the video machines. He couldn't have been happier. And so when he showed up in court again, they literally were friends. They had bonded, but they bonded around a kitchen table where they had the opportunity to really meet each other. And that was my first opportunity to see that my whole strategy, right, of trying to, put the witnesses on the stand and argue for this and argue for that, that really wasn't even what was needed or what was best. What was best was what they did at that kitchen table. And so that was the good news. The bad news was that the judge didn't. We did what's called a 402 conference. We went back in his chambers, and I explained this to him. And I know I got a little bit loud because another judge from down the hall came in and said, Cheryl, I heard your voice. Are you okay? What are you doing? You need to calm down. And I just couldn't believe that this judge couldn't feel and sense and know that that was the best possible way that could have turned out. Anyway, Aaron got a finding of supervision, which meant that, if he stayed out of trouble for 3 months, then, the case would go away. But as we walked out of court, Aaron looked at me, and I was not satisfied with that. And the judge was like, it's the best deal you're gonna get. I didn't want a deal. I wanted these people to understand that this boy had done everything right.
He had repaired the harm with the person that he had harmed.
Thank you. How about that? Right? In basic restorative justice philosophy and language, that's exactly what he did. And nobody cared because nobody understood that. So anyway, so of course, Thanksgiving came up, and the day after Thanksgiving, Aaron is out past curfew with his buddies. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just out. They blew curfew. That was a violation of his supervision. Supervision turned into probation. Violated probation on some other thing, driving in a car, and the car was speeding, and he wasn't driving, but it didn't matter. Didn't matter because the law said da 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 da. And once again, that was a violation. And I watched that boy, that beautiful young man whose heart was so sweet and so good, spiral down to the point where probably about maybe 2 years later, we were in court and we just looked at each other and he said to me, Cheryl, I don't want any more probation. I don't want intensive probation. We've been there, done that. You tried everything. He said, I want you to plead me to the Department of Corrections. Because by this time, he was 17. And so he could be tried as an adult, right? Or his, and he said, I just want to go into the DLC. I said, I'm not pleading you to the Department of Corrections. I couldn't do that. He said, you always told me this wasn't, you weren't the lawyer. You weren't just the lawyer here. That this was my case. And I had a say in my case. I said, and that's true. He said, and I can't I will fail probation again. Look at me. I failed supervision. I said, you didn't. He said, stop it. Whatever happened, please. And that's the first time I've ever done it, ever in my life. I actually pled somebody to the Department of Corrections because he knew if he went there on this very soft charge, that he would be out in a couple of months. But whereas intensive probation was for a year and a half. And he was probably right. I know he was right. He wasn't going to survive that. So it broke my heart. It broke my heart. And it let me know that I had to do something different. And so I had already learned about restorative justice and always remembering what happened to him around the kitchen table, decided that's the route I need to go. So very long story. I'm so sorry that took so long to tell. It's just every time I think about him, it just breaks my heart.
But I wanted to reflect on a couple things that you shared in there about, the system as it existed that you believed in a lot of ways, right? Was really ignoring the humans involved and the needs of the people involved, which are, is what restorative justice is all about. I think we talk about restorative justice in a lot of ways. One of the things that you said to me is like fundamental questions are, how are you? What do you need? That's it. How are you to Aaron and Joey? We're good. We squashed it. What do you need? For you to go away, please. Right. Let us go play video games.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right, David. Yes, right. Yeah.
And that's not what the system wants. It wants punishment. Or I think, when we talk about restorative justice, victim and offender doesn't like fully give the picture of who these people are. So when we say, this little boy with mental disabilities, Joey is so much more than that, right? Joey's now this little boy who knows how to play these video games at the arcade thanks to the person who taught him, who just also happened to be the person who pushed him in a moment of frustration. Aaron, the sweet kid who, was always like, I'm never going to be the one in trouble. You're not going to have to do this for me. Had a moment of like frustration, misunderstanding. And yes, he should not have pushed that the boy. He could have had different communication skills, right? 2 years later, he does not need to end up in IDOC. It's really tough. You'd said that you'd learned the word restorative justice a little bit before that, and this sent you on a path to learn more. Where did you learn the word restorative justice, and where did you go after this case?
So I was ready to quit. And I remember I stomped into the office of Bernadine Dorn, who was my supervisor. And I said, I quit. I quit. And she immediately said, hold on 1 second. And she went out the room and came back in with a pot of tea and 2 cups. So we could both sit down and talk about it. And I told her the story. And she had been with me on that journey anyway, right? And she said, is there a different way that could have been approached? I said, of course. And I began to talk about some of the things I had begun to learn about like victim offender conferencing, which is one of the restorative justice practices. And basically, Kay Pranis, who's done a lot of writing and has been like a major mentor just because she always framed it as the community needs to have a voice. That you think about indigenous practices, first of all, there was no place to send somebody out to, right? The community viewed, when they hurt somebody, they viewed it as a harm against the community. And the goal is that how do you bring that person back into community, which is a really beautiful way to think about it. Like, we don't push people out. There are no, what do you call it, disposable people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the thing is, they've done something wrong. Okay, how do we show them how to get back on the right path, right? How do we give them another chance? How do we see them as people who are not unredeemable but totally redeemable, because there are people. And and so I've been thinking about that, and but there was never any real way or place to do that. And so Bernadine said, so we talked about it, and she said, okay. I said, okay, what? She said, why don't we explore that? I said, really? She said, yeah. And that was the one good thing about being in that particular institution at that particular time, is that there was a lot of things happening socially and in the legal world. And Bernadine was definitely not afraid. And she said, let's explore it. And we did. And so we ended up creating a model that sort of was based on what they call victim offender conferencing, but we called ours community panels for youth, basically because we wanted community to be in it.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I, Bernadine, said, okay, let's see if we can get the state's attorney to send some cases out to us. I said, that'll never happen. She said, it'll never happen if we don't go talk to them about it. And so she said, and I said, when you say we, she said, I mean you and me. So Bernadine, who's like this fierce freedom fighter, right? And here we are sitting down with state's attorneys, talking to them about a restorative process that they had never heard of. But at that time, there was a nun, Sister Kathy Ryan, who was the chief state's attorney at the time, and she had heard of it. Anyway, long story short, I'm making this long. She was like, okay, let's see how it could work. And so she assigned a judge from the Austin community to work with me. And then Bernadine and I figured out which students would be good. And so we had a little team going, and we went and talked. But the whole thing was that it had to be about community. So I literally, with this team, our team, we talked to everybody who ran an organization in the Austin community, right?
Austin
We
on the west side of Chicago, not Austin,
Thank you.
Texas. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't get to go to Texas, right? So on the West Side community, that it's like a pretty much a Black community, and a lot of really powerful folks in there. A lot of people that were also really struggling in that community. Um, and some really powerful organizations. And what I learned from that community, and then from the North Lawndale community, which is right next to Austin, is that if you say it's about community, then you have to give up the law school has to give up some control, right? And I'll never forget, oh my God, one of the most beautiful people I ever met in my life. And what she said to me when I was, people would invite us in to come speak, because, oh, you're from Northwestern University, right? And initially I thought that would be a plug to get us into organizations, say, we want to keep your kids out of the system, right? And here's how we need you to be involved. And I go to the meetings, and I remember this one woman tapped me on the shoulder. She said, I've read your literature. It's really good. She said, but you need to know one thing. I'm like, okay. Her name was Shirley Jones, right? And so Miss Shirley said, see, when you come up in here, I know you see yourself as a sister from the South Side. She said, but we don't know you. She said, I think your idea is a really good one, but right now it's your idea. It's not our idea yet. And she said, and we're not single focused. Yes, we don't want our kids caught up in the system, but we also got to have food on our table. We're trying to get employment. We're trying to worry about the schools for our kids. She said, so like, you are one of many. She said, what you need to do is come to the meetings when you're not on the agenda. You need to come and just sit and listen to what people are struggling with, because nobody's one dimensional. And you need to be able to see us as people and not just participants in your program. And I thought, oh my God, this is really good advice, but she probably hates me. But then at the end of that meeting, she came over and she tapped me on the shoulder. She said, you want to go have some dinner? I'm like, okay. And so me and Miss Shirley and about 5 other women went and sat around a table at one of the restaurants in North Lawndale, and we just talked, and they told me about their kids, and we talked about, some of the other issues around housing discrimination, and we were just people talking, and that's I attribute a lot to Bernadine and a whole lot to Miss Shirley, because it was so much about being in relationship, right? And yes, did we end up starting a project in North Lawndale and in Austin and in about 7 other neighborhoods? But I learned the lesson, and I kept learning it, right? That because what I also ran into was, oh, you're from that big white institution that, comes in and gets the community, and then y'all get all this research money and you're going to do research. I'm like, no, I'm a sister from the South Side. It didn't matter. If people don't know you, they don't know you, right? So anyway, we started community panels for youth at Northwestern.
Can I jump in really quick?
Sure.
So yesterday, I was having a conversation with Derek Brown. You and I both know Derek Brown well, and that's really how you and I got connected
right.
in the North Lawndale neighborhood. For those of you listening right now, the episode with Derek will be in a couple weeks. But we were having this conversation about this exact thing, right? Where people from institutions or people from, I think, well-intentioned people from outside of neighborhoods come in with these grand ideas. Let's say, for example, a restorative justice community court or community panels for youth. And, don't build those relationships within the community. And I think community is such, community means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the what you were talking about, with Access Living, nothing about us without us. When you're coming into when you from outside are coming into a community and saying we have this great idea, let's find a token few people to get on board with this, and then run this. It's very different than let's come into this community, listen, ask what do you need, right, and then do that instead of our agenda, even though we have the money, we have the quote unquote power in this situation. It's so important. I don't want to fully hijack where we were going, because I know you and I can go.
So important. No, that is not hijacking anything. That is really fundamentally the basis of restorative justice. And if I hadn't have had those experiences of really, because Miss Shirley didn't just take me to dinner that night. I mean, she took me, I went to all kinds of meetings with her, and we sat in the back, and I was not on the agenda. And because of that, I got to hear I got to participate in all kinds of conversations that have anything to do with the law or justice or the courts, but just how are people living, and what are people excited about in terms of opportunities, and what are they really, really deeply struggling with and worried about. And so I became a sister in the neighborhood because I was there so much, right? And so did my students, and so did the other people who were involved. And what we learned was the most valuable lesson ever that I hope when I sit with other people, I impart. And it's that nothing changes. Nothing changes with people from the outside coming in trying to do something. Nothing changes. And I wasn't, in my heart, I was trying to create a situation like that kitchen table situation, right? I wanted the people themselves to do the relationship building, right? For them to be closer in their own neighborhoods. But I also had to learn when that was not, that could be what I wanted, and I needed to let people know that, and I need to step back and provide what they needed if they needed anything from us, right? And so what we created was something different than what we started out thinking we would create, because initially, the panels were really groups of community people who sat, at that point we were sitting around a table with whoever the young people were who were referred to our program. And but we met them first. We were the ones that went to court and sat, and they referred people, and we said, this is completely voluntary, so you do not have to do this. That's how we started it, right? Mm-hmm. And if you do decide, this is what you can expect, right? I said, but also is that you're going to have to admit that you did something, because this is not a fact finding. We're not court. We're not trying to figure out. It's like, and we can talk about what that was, but we're going to try and bring the person who you caused the harm with. And we use those words. We just say the victim and the offender. We use those words: person that caused the harm, person who was harmed. But we're going to sit around and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to see what they need, but also what do you need? And this is about, and we talked about it in a very balanced way. And so the training that we did for community, we started out doing it in community. And then once again, Miss Shirley said, Cheryl, I think they'd like to go downtown and see the lakefront a little bit. So if you could have some of these trainings downtown in that fancy law school, that would be kind of nice. It'd be a nice treat for people. So that's what we did. But it didn't matter where we held it, because it was the same. And the training really was giving them a chance. We had, first of all, we talked about restorative justice. We talked about the process. And then we had a full day where they actually got a chance to practice. So we recruited young people from the neighborhood, and we paid them to come in, and we did some mock sessions. And in the end, some of those young people who were like the children who came in to play that role, they ended up becoming some of the panel members. And so it grew sort of organically in people's children. So I'd like to do that. So can we do it? And I'll never forget, never, ever, ever. Because Miss Shirley also said, don't discount anybody. They may seem, when you meet them, like maybe they couldn't handle all of this, but don't discount them. And there was just one brother who worked in a factory. He had 3 sons, and he was very proud when he came to interview with us. And the interview team was people from the community plus 1 or 2 of us, right? And he came in and he was telling us about how he had 3 sons, and his 3 sons had never been incarcerated. And his goal was that none of those other children ever had to be incarcerated. He also had a very serious stutter, right? And sometimes I was nervous when he would sit for a panel. I was nervous that somebody might laugh, right? Or somebody might, just insult him. And I quickly learned that I didn't have to watch out for him, because he knew who he was, right? And I remember this one incident at a panel. This young woman comes in, like, one of the rules was you can't wear gang colors, right? And got to take off your hat. That was a rule. The community decided these needed to be right. And we wanted you to always come with a support person. This young woman came by herself. She had on gang colors. She had on a hat that she had pulled down over her ears. And so it was always 3 people from the neighborhood. And he was the lead person. And so everybody said, well, maybe we shouldn't let her come in. He's like, no, she made it here, and she came by herself, which means she really wanted to come. Let's see what happens. So he starts out and he introduces himself. And once again, it's kind of labored because he's stuttering, because he's nervous. But because he's taking his time and he's not apologizing for himself, he's, what he said was, I stutter a little bit, and it may be hard initially to understand me, but you lean in to hear me like I'm going to lean in to hear you. And so they both leaned in across the table to each other. And he said, I'm leaning in, but I still can't see your face because of that hat. He said, would you mind taking the hat off? And so she said, well, my hair don't look too good. He said, that's okay. He said, well, just push it up a little bit. So she pushed the hat up. He said, oh my goodness, you look like my cousin so-and-so. But he wasn't bullshitting, he was. And so she gets this little tiny smile on her face. And then he says, oh my God, is that a smile I see? Oh my goodness. And of course the smile widens, right? And then he just said, wow. He said, thank you so much for that. He said, you have honestly made my day. And then he went on to talk about how he'd been at the factory. I mean, he just, right. And part of it was the community could just normalize it. Like, I'm glad to see you. I mean, it was the beginning of the whole notion of radical hospitality, right? I really am glad you're here. It's not just about your case, it's about who you are and how you're feeling and what you need. And it ended up that the person that she had caused the harm to, I put that in quotes, didn't show up. But we didn't let that stop us. If people had been invited, they said they were going to come. If they didn't show, then we would call, and if they said, well, that's okay, I don't even want to proceed, well, then we would just then focus on, okay, what does this young person need, right? But she wanted to talk about what happened. And so they had a full-fledged conversation, and she wanted to talk about what she had done and why she had done it and how she didn't want it to happen again. But that would mean that she and this person need to have a conversation. And so just so the community worked it out. It didn't matter that it was not in court anymore, right? Because we just said, they didn't show. And so then if the person harmed didn't show, then the case would be dismissed. But she wanted it. So somebody knew somebody's aunt who knew, right? And they went. And so we set up another time. And then the families came and they brought food with them. It ended up being over a meal. People were able to talk about what's happening and straighten things out. And so community panels were not necessarily supposed to operate like that, right? It was supposed to be much more technically run. But the community said, no, this is how we need it. And then they became, the Austin community and the North Lawndale community became the examples for the 5 other communities that then actually ended up with like 11 neighborhoods. And so then they became, we would step back when we had the trainings, and they would be the ones that would talk about the program. And I'll never forget, the best thing that happened was that we decided we need to step back completely. Like, we have enough people trained, enough people know how to do this, enough people who can co-train, can train other people. And so we helped raise money in North Lawndale so that they had a person who went to court, right? They had a person that got those cases. Because the whole thing is that the court needs to know the community. They don't need to just know Northwestern, right? And so at first they went with us, and then we just stepped back. And I was really proud of that effort. And ended up that we decided to move on to do peace circles. We felt like you could go a lot deeper with peace circles. Plus, we felt like we needed to spend more time developing capacity in the neighborhoods. So.
Yeah. I think.
Boy, I talk a lot, David. Damn.
You didn't know that? Just put a quarter in and let it go.
Oh Lord, let's turn off the machine.
I think one of the things that I wanted to pull out of that, though, is like, it was supposed to be like this scripted thing, but when that brother showed up the way that he is authentically, like, yes, he knew the principles, he knew the values, he knew what the practice was, but it was, hey, lean in, pull up your hat. You look like my cousin. I love your smile.
Right.
That's what broke all of this. Totally. It wasn't about what happened. Mm-mm. Who was impacted and how. No. What have you thought about since? It's not this scripted list of questions. It's how you show up for people and really like being present with them, being attentive to what's in the room. And one of the things for me in like, trying to teach this work, like, that stuff is easy. Like the specific questions asked, like the procedure of it all, that's easy. How do we teach people to, first love themselves enough to show up as themselves, and then extend that to others? Yeah. That's so much of what this work is. Like, it's all about relationships. The first relationship you have is the one with yourself. And you teach that through a lot of different ways. You mentioned peace circles. I'm wondering how you like started to make that transition.
I think what we realized, no, I don't think. I know what we realized is that we were doing too much, right? So we we're in North Lawndale. That was the first place where we tried to just take ourselves out of it, right? And I think because we've been in it so much and we've been the center of it so much, people felt like we were exiting the project, right? So then, by that we have more people working with us, and but I feel like we knew there was something more we could be doing, and we could be doing it in a different way. And what we realize is that in the very beginning, it shouldn't be us. Like, not like, okay, we start out and then we turn it over to the community. No, that even if we're in it as equal partners, or maybe not even equal partners. Like, we're in it to provide what's needed, but they don't need as much we think we do. They do. It's not like people know how to be kind to people. People need the opportunity sometimes in the space to not be on guard, right? To not have to be tough. Um, I mean, some of the best circle keepers, um, the people we've trained to actually keep or facilitate circles, are a lot of times are people who have really been through the toughest, hardest times and welcome the opportunity to share that other side of themselves. I mean, they know what pain feels like. They've been there. But to be in a space where it's not totally focused on your pain, it's also focused on your joy, it's focused on what you love, what your interests are. Circles there's so much more opportunity to build relationships. And I've seen a lot of people do, I'm putting quotes around victim offender conferencing, because as I said, we were not really true to that model, right? Um, but I know that we needed to start there because it looked more like what we could describe it in ways that it sounded more like something court people would be comfortable with. Okay, well, you have the people who are going to ask the questions, or the people that cause the harm, blah, blah, blah. And so they felt like they could understand that. I think had we just started out with peace circles, it would have been a much more difficult time trying to get people to send folks out to circles. Or maybe I'm just saying that for myself. Maybe I needed that period of transition, right? Maybe the people would have been just fine with it, right? But bottom line, what happened when I bumped into circles, I feel like I bump into these things, right? I just fell in love. I honestly just fell in love with the process, with the practice, with the frame that is, you start absolutely with relationship building. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, if you try to start with the issue, you don't get very far, because most of the time, really, people are trying to speak up for themselves, right, and present themselves in the best way possible. And so it really doesn't matter what the question is, even. Let me just, put on a good face. And you don't have to do that in circle. You
What was your
really,
first
really don't.
experience with Circle?
Oh, let's see. Jesus Christ, what's my first experience in circle? I remember a circle. Well, one of the circles I really remember well actually was a hate crime. It wasn't one of my first, but it was probably one of the ones that I was most surprised about. Um, there was a white family, a young white person. He was maybe, I don't know, like 15. Um, and there was a group of Black people, like these young men and their girlfriends. Maybe they were like 19, 20. And they, one evening in the summer, they had ended up at a park in Marquette Park. And back then, Marquette Park was not an area where you had a lot of Black people, and there tended to be sometimes a lot of friction if Black people were in the area, particularly not when they weren't just like moving through. Like, if you're in your car, okay, right? But like, what are you doing on our swings? What are you doing on our slide? And so there's two couples, and one guy was in the service and he was home on leave, right? So maybe he was 21 and the girl was 19. This is his girlfriend from home, and a couple of Black folks. And this one kid comes right in through on his bike and yells out the N word. And they just sort of laugh him off because they're having a good time. And there were other people in the park who, everybody was fine. And then he came back with these other people on their bikes, and a couple of them ended up having bats, right? And so basically they ended up threatening these couples, these Black couples, and told them, if they didn't get out the park, they were going to F them up, and really threatened them. They were waving the bats. Nobody got hit with anything, but it was really, really scary. And I think actually maybe as they were leaving, they threw stuff at them. So this case was in court, right? And somebody knew about restorative justice. The judge, this was a case where the judge agreed to let the case go out to a peace circle. And so it was one of the first court referred cases that were sent to circle that I knew about, that I had an experience with. And I was really reluctant to take it, both myself and the co-keeper, Pamela Purdy, who works with Precious Blood, Ministry of Reconciliation. And because the young white, the one boy that got caught, right? Let me speed up on this. The one young man that got caught, he really wasn't saying that he did anything. It's more like he saw something. So it's like, you know what? Is this enough to? I mean, do they want to just hear? Then I thought, well, why are we trying to decide what people want to hear? Why don't we just bring the people together in circle and let's see where this goes? Let's see what happens. Because they had identified him as the initial person on the bike. And so his whole thing was, well, I was just sort of there. I wasn't doing anything. So he comes with his mother. And this guy had been sent back to wherever he was stationed. He came back to Chicago for this peace circle, right? And it was a long night. I think we started at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. We had some food and refreshments, some hospitality. And then we started in on the circle. And I don't think we got done until like 10:30. We were there a long time. And the reason why we were there so long is because the little boy, wasn't a little boy, but the young man was afraid to speak in front of his mother. Because as it turned out, she told him, don't admit to anything. But upon sitting with these young Black folks, he began to feel how scared they were and how ashamed these young Black men were that they couldn't protect their girlfriends, right, from what appeared to be these young white kids. And so because, after we did some relationship building, or at least tried to, and young man, the white young man was much more into all of he was sharing it, and he was laughing at some of the icebreakers we did, that his mother wasn't. She was stone-faced the whole time. And so at one point, we asked her and another person from the other side to step out to do it, right? And then we just sent the talking piece around to see if anybody has anything they want to share, because it was clear he wanted to say some stuff, but he couldn't. And so with his mother gone, he burst into tears. And he said, I never knew any Black people. He said, I just didn't. There's nobody on my block, nobody in my school. He said, I just didn't. And so when people said, oh, there's some Black folks in the park, we need to get them. And he said, I remember thinking, get them for what? Like, I mean, I didn't have any reason to dislike you. I didn't know you. I mean, I knew this, and he said the stereotypes about you. But he said, but then when we got in the park and everybody else was joining in, it's like, and people said to me, man, what's wrong with you? You a punk or something? So I didn't want to be punked out. But he said, I honestly didn't throw anything. I was there, and I was the first person on the bike that you saw. And I went back and said, hey, there's some, and I didn't say Black. I used the N word. There's some N's in the park. He said, but mostly, he said, as I think about it and I'm listening to you all night, that was just ignorance. I honestly, that's the way we talk. And he said, and now, and I'm just so ashamed. And he just started crying. And what happened was the Black guy who would come back from the service, who was the one who was the most animate, that, he wanted the book thrown at them. He actually got up out of his seat and walked over and didn't just offer that young man some Kleenex. He held on to his shoulder and said, man, we all of us do some stuff we're ashamed of. He said, the key is that you don't keep doing it. And then that was probably into the third hour, right, when this happened. And he just stood there with his hand on this boy's shoulder for a while until he stopped crying. And then one of the girls said, "You need to give her those tears when your mother walks in here. We don't want her to see you crying." And he said, "No, I don't want her to see me crying either." And so, that we asked the mother, did she want to come back in? And she said, "No, I don't know what he's in there saying, but whatever it is, I'm ready to get out of here." We said, "Okay, we know we'll be done." So she didn't even come back in. I mean, he was of age. He was okay to be in there by himself. And they ended up finding something to laugh about. I'll never forget the way that circle ended was, I mean, it was about why were we all in the park in the first place? Why are we on swings and little kids? Why were we there? And they just started laughing and talking. And so everybody, and everybody shook hands and slapped shoulders in the end. But mostly it was that it took that time, because most of the time we don't have time, or we don't take time. Everything's moving very fast at a very fast clip. Let's get this done. In court, step up to the judge. How do you plead? Okay, case continue, come back. Attorneys, are you ready? You're not even encouraged to try and talk or share or get to know, much less repair harm. And so, I mean, that's one of the ones I remember the most, because it wasn't anybody we knew, right? It was, just straight out of court. And it was unusual that the case be referred like that, particularly a hate crime case, what they had labeled a hate crime case. So, but I know from even the circles before that, and most of those, like, we did a lot of celebration circles, and we did healing circles, and we did reentry circles when people were coming back to school from being, kicked out for whatever reason. Or, we try to teach people mostly that circles don't need to be complicated. They don't have to be fancy. Nobody needs a credential. You don't need to have a master's degree or a PhD or any kind of degree at all. You just need to have a heart and a willingness to sit with people and work your best, try your best not to be judgmental, and not to decide that what should be the outcome. And there's a lot of other stuff in there too. But mostly it's
none of
about
it
practice.
requires none of it requires like that formal education. It
No.
requires,
Yeah.
like you said, showing up as yourself,
Mm-hmm.
embodying the values, and like those are some of the things that we
Yeah.
teach. But like you learn those things really by participating in the process,
Mm-hmm.
and practicing.
Yeah.
Sometimes doing it well, sometimes messing it up,
Yes. Right.
and learning from that. Is
Right.
there a time that stands out to you about like, oh man, like, oh, like,
Oh, yes.
would you mind sharing one of those and what you learned from it?
So, yeah, actually, that was a really important lesson, and still remains an important lesson. Um, so it was a community several different organizations, and there have been some issues of, and this was serious, some issues of sexual assault, um, by a person that worked within one of the organizations. And everybody took sides, right? Even within the organizations, people had taken sides on, I mean, not siding with the person who was the abuser, but figuring that if we don't work with that person, support that person, then he won't have an opportunity to change because he doesn't have the resources himself. So somebody needs to support him. But how are we then supporting these young women, right? And so there was this struggle within the community. This happened a while ago, um, and so we were called in because everybody had decided that they knew what should happen, and not just that the person who was the abuser who you needed to come and sort of fess up, but that the people that were supporting him needed to stop. And that's not how circles work. It's not like, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to hold people accountable, right? We're going to decide that this is what should happen. That's not how they start. They start with relationship building. They start with spending some time, even with people that you struggle with, to basically humanize each other enough so that I care about listening to you. I do want to hear what you have to say, and that the values that are so important in circle. So in every circle, one of the things you do towards the very beginning is to ask people, to think about or to imagine how, where and how and with whom it is that they feel safe. And then what do you need to feel safe or to feel like you can be yourself and be fully present and open up in a circle, in this circle space. And the values are pretty fundamental. Respect. I need people to be respectful of me. I need people to listen. I need to be fully present. I need people to be patient with me. When in circles we pass what we call a talking piece, and it's an object that means something to the person that offers it into the center. And usually we ask everyone to bring a talking piece and to place it in the center after they've explained what it means to them, and then use that piece as we go throughout the circle, but also keep them in the center so people always see themselves in the center. They always see themselves in the space. They have something to, when they get nervous or upset, something that they can even sort of focus in on. And so one of the values is honoring the talking piece. When you have it, it's your opportunity to talk and to speak from your heart and honestly. And when you don't, it's a wonderful opportunity to listen and to see listening as an opportunity. So, but it was a struggle because, for a lot of reasons, people had sort of taken sides, but people wanted to get to, let's get to what's going to happen. Let's get to what people, but they weren't ready to get there. And so I felt, me and the other couple of people that were doing the circle, we felt like they felt like we were holding them back. Like, we're ready to go. We're ready to write an agreement. We're ready to move on with this. But they weren't, because they really weren't listening. It's like they came in the same way that they were, and they had not really taken into account what other people were saying. And so part of me felt like, then maybe I need to step out of this. Like, maybe I am in the way, right? Maybe this is as far as they're going to get, and I'm just invested in a different outcome, right? And then I, spent some time thinking and talking with other people that it had done. I kept thinking, I wish Aura was here, because Aura, she did so much domestic violence work, and she would have known how to handle this, and she would have known the different, I'm thinking strategy, and now I'm thinking legal strategy. It's like, stop, that's not what this. Yes, I do need Aura here, but she is here, right? And what she's telling me is to follow your gut. Kindly follow your gut, right? And so I just, I ended up talking to some other people, who are outside the circle, not sharing anything confidential, because confidentiality is a fundamental circle value. But and they said, it's moving too fast. People are trying to rush it, and it can't be rushed. And so maybe what you need to do is invite them to slow down, or invite them to consider some other questions. And we actually talked through what those questions were and see if that helps. So long story short, it did help, because the invitation was to imagine how you could see that person that caused the harm fully integrated into the community. What would have to happen? Like, imagine that. Let's vision that, and let's vision what these young women, feeling safe again, right? And what would need to happen for that, and then for you to feel that you can once again, be fully committed to the community. What is that? And so we spend some time imagining, which may sound silly, but sometimes you have to really think about what you need before you can just decide what demands you want to make of somebody else. Like, what do I need? Because it may be that what you think you need is not exactly, it's coming from your head and not so much from your heart. So anyway, just know that instead of one circle, we ended up doing 5 circles.
Yeah.
And people would say, oh my God, what a waste of time, blah, 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 blah. But it wasn't, because it was about the community coming together and feeling itself and beginning to feel the people and to feel the stress of the people, and not just their weaknesses and not just the things that really, cause them so much distress, but remembering their value. And so it was hard though, because I felt like I'm in the way, I want something different, but all I wanted was to give the space time for the people to really feel each other.
So those are some of the things that you've learned with doing peace circles, knowing that like it's not a really quick fix. A lot of times people are looking for that, and that's not what this work is about. But you started an organization called Community Justice for Youth Institute with Aura Shube, and this is after the community panels for youth. Tell me about the process of starting that and what you all have done since.
So actually, while we were still at Northwestern, and we had broadened our team for community panels for youth, and the the Bernadine was actually had come to totally embrace restorative justice, which was always amazing to me because she was such a fierce advocate. But then so was Aura, right? In some ways, so was I. But they took it to a whole new level, which was beautiful. But some of the other powers that be at the law school were really not happy with us engaging all of our law students in this restorative work. So we told people, you will do 1/3 traditional law, you will do 1/3 restorative justice work, and then the rest of it will be pure community. And what we'd say to them is that when you get your law degree from Northwestern, people, and you're going to go to work for some little fancy law firm. We know some of you will, and that's okay. And people are going to ask you to sit on their boards. And their boards are going to be trying to give money to those poor people in the neighborhoods. And we want you to be able to not speak for those people in the neighborhoods or those community organizations. We want you to bring those people to the table to meet those board members. We want you to take the board members out to the neighborhood to meet those people, because you're going to have a voice and we want you to know how to use it. And so I think they probably would have been okay if we had just done RJ work, but taking the folks to the neighborhoods and to the different prisons and having some episodes that were exciting, but a little crazy. And so we started to get pushback in a way that I feel like we didn't deserve. I mean, I feel like we were opening up this legal clinic to something that no other there were other legal clinics in the country that were doing it, but certainly none in Chicago. And so Tony Curtis, who is the blood and soul, that's not how you say it, it's the guts of the Children and Family Justice Center. She kept us all moving, kept us all on task. She said, maybe it's time for you all to start your organization. Start an organization. We're not going to start it. But after about a year, we thought maybe so. Maybe that's what we do need to do. And Tony actually got the paperwork done for us and presented it to us. And so we said, okay. And I never forget when we had sort of left our positions at the legal clinic, and we're like, okay, so now we have no salary, we have no office, we have this great idea for what we want to do. We have a name, and and we realized we know how to practice law. We don't really know how to run an organization. But then all we had to do was open our arms and ask. And people were so generous and so loving and so helpful. And so people really embraced us and said, no, this is good work. But that we were still doing community panels for youth. We're doing some circle work. But that's at the point when North Lawndale was just really getting strong and we were supporting them. And so, but Robert Spicer, who was with us, I have to say this really quick. So Robert Spicer is an amazing brother. And he came to us. He had been teaching 3rd grade at a elementary school in Cabrini Green, right? And he wanted to do something different. And so when he came to us, he didn't even know what restorative justice was, but it didn't matter because he came, and he's gonna kill me for this, but he had a all suited up, and his shirt was hanging sort of out of the suit, and he had cufflinks, but he didn't have a cufflinks in, and he was so nervous. He was sweating bullets, and I had an office where if you stepped up, you could step out of my window onto the roof. And so sometimes we would just have meet people out on the roof. It was ridiculous. All at Northwestern, right? So this one guy, Jeffrey Banks, who's now an esteemed funder now, he came in from the window, stepped down onto the sofa and sat down and joined the interview with Robert Spicer. And I thought Spicer was going to be, I know he was like, what the heck am I doing here and why am I doing it? Anyway, he became like the lead person with community panel. He actually stayed with us. I remember him calling his mother saying, I'm going to be working at Northwestern University. And then the next week, I'm not at Northwestern University anymore. We're out in the neighborhood. So, but he was a beautiful soul. And so he moved with us and some other people did too. And so we did that for a while. But we began to integrate circles more and more and more and more. So CJ, Community Justice for Youth Institute, retained this relationship with the court initially. And then we decided, why don't we think more about how we support communities more? Because otherwise, this is too much court and not enough community. And so early on, after we had moved, before we moved, we ran into Father Kelly. He actually dropped by to visit us. Kate Francis had told him to come see us. And so we started doing collaborative work with the program at Precious Blood, which has grown and grown and grown. And we began to do more collaboration with neighborhood resources. So we weren't trying to go in and meet everybody. We would go into readily established community entities and teach them and then let them use it and as they chose. CJY has been the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've probably done the best work I've ever done as part of it. And I remember when we left Northwestern, Ora said, I cannot believe I'm leaving. She was doing some major immigration work. She was doing, just some really major deep cases. And we actually had some pretty significant murder cases, even as part of not murder, yeah. And so we had to really think about, and we decided that, yeah, this was the right path. In fact, it was the only path because there was a path that was going to open up into a forest, that was open up to a river, that was going to open up into the whole rest of the world. And that's what it turned out to be. I mean, from starting in Austin and North Lawndale, I mean, it took us to Kenya and to Cape Town and to Rio and to the favelas. And I mean, we ended up in all kinds of places that I never would have dreamed of going, doing the RJ work and learning more than just learning. People all over the world are invested in doing it differently. Are seeing justice is not about courts, but is about community and people. When we were in Brazil, we were in Bahia, and we met a judge. And this is a judge who is still in touch. She actually is part of our Circle for Circle Keepers that you actually facilitate. And she recently has written a book about restorative justice, Isabel. But she introduced it. She took us to a youth prison. I will never forget this. And so she said, they're really wonderful. There's a woman warden and she's really great. And so we met the warden and she took us into this huge area and these boys, it was a boys facility. And everybody had a big loom and they were weaving. I mean, they were making the most beautiful tapestries and just different items. I remember talking to one young man. I said, so do you ever get a chance to meet the people who, get the things that you make? He said, oh yes, they come in. I said, they come in? And he said, yeah, they come in. We have days where we have things for sale and they come in and they get to browse. I said, really? He said, yeah. Or we take our items out and we sell them. Like, you take them out. And so then I remember talking to the ward after. I said, this is really interesting. So they actually get to go out. And she said, well, how else would they learn or relearn how to be in community? If they're isolated from people in the neighborhoods, in the communities that they're going to go home to, how do they develop relationships that are strong enough to support them when they get out? And I said, well, what else happens? She said, well, like we have sports. I said, oh, so you let the teams from the other schools come in? She said, no, we play all our sports on their fields at their schools. And like they go out, and she kept looking at me like, what do you all do? I was like, they're incarcerated, they're kept in cells, maybe they get to walk the yard, or they have activities, but there's no thought of integrating the folks who are inside with the folks who are outside. I mean, more and more there is now, but I was just blown away. And I kept thinking, we have to be able to see it to imagine it, but we need to get better at just imagining it, right? What is it that we want for people? What experiences, what lives, what resources? Because otherwise, if we limit ourselves to what we can see right now, we're never going to achieve what we really want to see. And so and I mean, we spent a week and a half in Nairobi, and we were with a group of we stayed at a convent. It was so cold anyway. And so people came into the convent. It was like a 4-day training. And I'll never forget, there was a group of people who, this was around election time. And what they were trying to do is give these people the skills to go back and hold circles in their different areas of the country to prevent the kind of violence that had happened during the prior election. And so I had read about the Maasai warriors. I had, read lots of things. And then to meet people who confirmed everything I ever read about how powerful they were, but how kind they were, and how, the whole concept of caring for children
and Guerra, how are the children?
Yes, exactly, right? Uh, and how it was political time, so people would come with their colors on, like the orange was for one party and the red was for another party. And I remember Ora started referring to them as their gang colors, and they liked that term. They're like, yeah, my gang colors. But like, no, you don't want to use that, don't pick that up from us. But anyway, and so, but I'll never forget just the whole lesson that one of the Maasai guys said. He said, we sit in circle a lot, we live out and they're just open plains, he said, but the reason why we sit in circle, even just for our meetings where we're planning our strategy, for even war, traditionally, is that when you're in circle, somebody always has your back, because somebody's always looking, right? What you can't see, somebody else can always see. And I just thought about that there's so many different ways to think about circle. But they talked about the geometry of the circle as being so important. And so it made me think that every single element of this has been thought about over time, and so I kept thinking, what are we adding to that? What are we contributing to the not just the knowledge base, but the emotional and health history of what this process is. And I think I just fell in love with circles then. I felt once I realized that people all over the world are engaging in these practices. And I saw ceremonies. I saw people doing capoeira in circle. I saw, people praying in circle. I watched, there was a baby that had been born, and they were having the baby, gathering, or party, that's not what you call it, but in circle. And I just realized that it's so much part of all of our cultures. Like, why aren't we embracing it that well? Like, to think of it only in times of conflict is to waste the energy and the beauty and the heart of that space. So that's what being at CJY just gave us time and space to just explore it as it's happening, all over, and then to invite people to come in and teach us. And that's been one of the great pleasures too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be like super Western, what does CJYI do?
So we are technically a training institute. And if you want to, and I use training loosely, right? I mean, we do. So what do? We do one of the things we learned from Kay Pranis, and then also from people like, Rita in Oakland and folks on the
Rita Alfred.
either Alfred in
Mm.
Oakland and folks on people on the East, Sujatha Balaga and Danielle Surratt and all the brothers and sisters I met in Oakland through the Burns Institute. You know, it's that we're all coming at this because we want to see something better, right? We know there's a better way. We know that people aren't disposable. We know that. And the question has been, but how do we hold people, right? How do we care about them? How do we prevent them from being thrown away? And circles can hold, and I've seen circles hold all kinds of hate, all kinds of racism, all kinds of harm. Um, and so what we attempt to do is to give people, one of the things we do is we do a monthly, and now it's become more than monthly, 4-day training in quotes, right? Experience,
Experience.
experience, right? Um, and what we decided was we weren't going to initially even train people or give them the experience of dealing with conflict, or deep conflict. That we would give people the experience of community building, relationship building, healing, circles of understanding. Because what we learned, and we learned this from doing work in schools, right, is that if you teach people how to address conflict, then all they will do is address conflict. People will see it as a way, because restorative justice is about harm or incidents of violence, and how do we address that violence? No, how do I have a chance to even feel and hear myself and what I care about and what I need? Because until I do that, it's hard for me to hear you and to care about what you need, because nobody's hearing me. And so teaching people, giving them a space to just feel what it feels like to be fully present, to feel like what it feels like to hear something that offends you and not immediately judge it and react to it, but to think about, okay, I wonder why that person said that, and to be able to say, I'm not sure why you said that because it's making me feel I'm upset. But tell me what you're thinking, or what am I, when do we have that time? When do we have community people really, really, really sit with the police? When do I sit with the police? A whole circle of 22 police officers. And I'm carrying with me one of the talking pieces I always carry, which is a mask that was painted by my goddaughter, right? And she painted it, and it's got stripes, colored stripes on the face of it. She painted it during one of her hospitalizations. She has some mental health issues. And when I asked her why she painted it that way, she said, so you can use it in some of your circles. She said, you can tell people about me. And more importantly, when they see that I've painted the different colors, think of those as layers, and think of those of layers of masking ourselves. And maybe in the circle, they'll feel safe enough to take off a layer or two. She said, because I don't get to remove a lot of mine. She said, but maybe they'll get to remove some of theirs. And that's how I see circles as. To me, that's the biggest benefit. Because once you feel that space, and once you decide you want to learn how to keep that space, you can use it for everything. But it's also really important, really, to use it a lot for yourself, to sit in spaces where you are healing yourself, where you are letting yourself take off a few layers of a mask, right? When you're not trying to deal with somebody else's family, but just sitting with your own family and, trying to process and really hear them, and not just waiting to be heard, but really listening to understand.
Yeah. And so, if people want to engage with Community Justice for Youth right now, how could they do that?
Well, we have a website. It's cjyi.org. And we have a wonderful, wonderful person named Joanne Archibald who will respond to any question or anything on the website. That's the best way to reach us. We That's really the best way to reach us. You can also email us at cjyi
peace@gmail.com.
yeah, .peace@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Actually, what you all don't know is that David, thank God, worked with us to help get us to be a real organization. So serious kudos and thanks to David, really. Serious.
And we'll definitely have all of that linked in the description for folks to check that out. We're coming up on our time for this conversation because I am gonna pull you back because you've had such a great time with us today. But I have a couple quick questions that I want to ask you. Just like first thing that comes to your mind. So restorative justice is
A way to learn more about yourself and to heal.
What is one situation that you wish people really knew this work? Place or situation, setting.
Schools, because young people, teachers, administrators all come to that house where they used to go to the schoolhouse every day, right? And they're trying to create an environment of learning. And what I've learned is that the first learning has to be about ourselves and who we are. And so that social emotional learning, that space to really learn how to feel people, how to listen to people, how to have emotional intelligence, that all of that that seems to take backspace to reading, writing, and arithmetic. Um, Circles gives you an opportunity to do all that and to have fun with it. You know, I want people to experience circles initially and be laughing, you know, laughing loud, right? And laughing with each other and to begin to, somebody says something and it's like, oh, you too, you felt that when that happened to you, that happened to you too. Like those connections that are not expected, but so natural. Because then it's like you're not the other anymore. You're somebody that felt the exact same thing I felt or something so like it. And I thought I was the only one. Or that thing that happened that felt like a paper cut, like I can't talk about it because it's not enough. But then somebody else talked about it. It's like, oh my God, yes, yes, yes. People need to be able to see each other. You know, Salvona, you know, I see you. And I think we can see each other. Then we can move on. We can move forward.
The follow-up question is just hanging there, so I have to ask it. How do we do this work in schools as currently constructed?
Here's what I've learned. You can't talk to people about circle. It's hard to even talk to people. I mean, you can do workshops on restorative justice, but people have to feel it and experience it. And just a quick short story. I went with a, a Chicago Public Schools administrator who gave me very specific instructions. Do not pull out any of those talking pieces. Do not pull out any of those silly cards you use. Don't pull out any of those stuffed animals. And really, could you just ask some serious questions? And I just nodded. I didn't nod innocent. I just nodded, right? I had my circle bag. She said, I hope you leave that circle bag in the car. Of course I didn't. So it was a meeting of administrators, of people who are over like maybe 10 schools each, right? These people meet once a month, every month. Most of them have been doing this same meeting with these same people over a period of like maybe 5, 6, 7, or 8 years. So luckily, the person that gave me those instructions, I got called to some other thing down the hall. And so I walk in and these people are looking like, what are we going to do? And so I said, so good morning. I said, how you doing? Oh, I'm kind of tired. I said, oh, well, we need an icebreaker, right? She also told me don't do any of those silly icebreakers. We need an icebreaker. So we do something that's really getting people to talk one-on-one. You ask silly questions. What's your favorite dance move from 5th grade? You know, just anything. You know, if you could be anywhere else but here, where would you be? And people just easy questions, and people just began talking and laughing, you know, one-on-one, and you move to a different group of people. And then when we sat down, somebody said, wow, that felt good. What else do you have for us? I said, why don't we check in? Of course, she told me don't bring out any of my cards, but I brought up these picture cards, right? You know, the Chiji cards, right? And I said, just pick a card that speaks to how you're feeling right now or something about your personality. They all got up eager to do it. People pick cards. They're laughing at each other's cards. We sit back down. And I said, first, introduce yourself. So they started out introducing themselves as Mrs. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. I said, no, 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 introduce yourself. They said, we are. I said, no, what's your name? Well, I said, like your first name. They didn't know it. They've been meeting for years. They didn't know each other's first names. So they reluctantly gave up their first names. And then the first woman that spoke, she had picked up the card with the cornucopia, the fruit coming out of the basket. And she got teary because it was in early November. And she said, she gave her name. She said, wow, she said, well, my name is, Cynthia, but people call me Cookie. You all can call me Cookie. So now they don't only know her name, they know her nickname. So they're all smiling about being able to call her Cookie, right? And she says, I say that because my mom always called me Cookie. She said, and Thanksgiving's coming up. She passed a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it's 2 weeks to the day. Nobody knew her mother. Nobody talks about their families, right? And so somebody else took out some Kleenex and brought it over to her. And so she started talking about her mom and how Thanksgiving was a huge celebration for them. And so then, so she talks about that. And so she passes the talking piece, which was the mask that my goddaughter had made. And she passes that. And the next person said, wow, I picked the sunrise because that reminds me of my daughter who passed. So it could have been really sad, but it was illuminating because other people talked about other things, but they were eager to share their first names and they were eager to talk about things that meant something. Did one person's daughter had just had some surgery, and she started crying, and then the next person said, well, my daughter had surgery recently, and let me tell you how we got through it. And by the time we got done, and thank God that woman didn't come back before we got done, because by the time we got done, I said, well, we don't have much time left. I said, we should do a checkout. I said, what if during the checkout, and I know this is going to be corny, but sing a few lines from one of your favorite songs. Sing, you want us to sing? I said, yeah, and I'll start. Of course, I can't sing, and David, I can't sing, but that never stopped me. And so I think I sang this little line of mine or something, right? And they all joined in when I started singing. So that really was, we just sang that, and then people kept adding verses. So that was really the only song, and then people just checked out about, and I said, okay, why don't you check out, what's your light? What's a light for you? And for a number of them, they became each other's lights, and so it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't, you think you bring things from home or somewhere that matter to you. You have some chairs, you put a piece of cloth in the center that represents something meaningful. One guy, I was in a circle a couple of weeks ago, he was incarcerated when he was a juvenile. He was 17. He was incarcerated for 25 years. He was in segregation the first 7 years. And when he was finally released, somebody brought him this black leather jacket to wear out. So when he keeps his circles, he lays that black leather jacket down and puts his talking piece on top of that. So, but just know the women didn't come back, but these women said, will you come next month? Will you come to our circle next month? I said, I don't know. You need to ask Dr. So-and-so and see what she says. Okay, we'll do it. And so I guess in terms of schools, we give the experience to the people that can make the decisions first. We start with them. I mean, I start with the parents on the outside and the administrators on the inside, because they think the circles are to fix the teachers, right? Or to fix the students. And it's not about fixing anybody. It's about giving people an opportunity to really meet themselves and to meet other people and to develop some healthy relationships, so that when we do have some issues or do have some struggles, we've already had celebrations together. We already have a sense of each other, and I already care enough about you to listen to what you have to say and know that you're not saying it to hurt me, so.
That'll teach me to answer. That'll teach me to ask a follow-up question.
I know, right? You better stop where you're ahead, David.
What is one thing you want everybody listening to this podcast to know?
The revolution is about self-love.
No follow-up question. No. Who's one person I should have on this podcast?
Just one? Okay.
No? Well, okay, so I'll say this. If you say their names, you have to put me in touch with them. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you gotta have Rita Alfred
Okay.
from Oakland. You gotta have Sujata Balaga
Mm-hmm.
from Oakland. You gotta have Fania Davis from Oakland. you you gotta have Dewana Nicole, who's like the most brilliant genius person I know around school stuff.
Mm.
You gotta have Pamela Purdy, because she knows how to make a circle fun and go deep as well as anybody I know.
Mm-hmm.
Father David Kelly from Precious Blood, who's been walking this walk, and he walks it in a way that is very deep and meaningful. I mean, and for him to come and talk about what they've been doing with, folks who are, coming home from prison, so to develop building spaces for them in the community so they have a place to come to, giving them meaningful work so they're not just languishing somewhere. Watching people come home from prison and have a life beyond their wildest dreams. And having some of those men, Raphael and Chili and Adolfo and
You're
Jojo,
right.
and
You're right. You're right.
I'm telling, have them on as a group. Oh my God, I I get such joy from seeing them. They have a hospitality desk, and other people from the Restorative Justice Community Hubs. Emmanuel Andre coming on with some of the youth that do the hip hop RJ piece, right? Having people from Matt's group in Little Village, having people from Coco. I mean, the restorative justice community hubs are spaces in neighborhoods that are
In
totally
Chicago.
in Chicago. Sorry, y'all need to do it too, wherever you are. That are totally infused and part of the neighborhood. And before they became restorative justice community homes, sometimes they feel like homes, hubs, they were already being restorative. Like the one in Little Village that Matt D'Amato runs, we met him and we said, okay, so you have young people come, every young person on probation in that neighborhood is sent to that center. When I say sent, I mean they're offered an opportunity to go, and they go. And the way they meet their young people is not through some, okay, what's your name and where do you live and how many kids in your family and blah, 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 blah. It's, we have Friday dinner once a month. We'd like to invite you and your parents and your siblings to come. So you come and you sit at tables that have been set with food you want to eat and music playing, and then there's a room for the adults to be after the meal and a room for the kids to be, young people to be. And so it's, once again, like, how do we build in relationships and knowing that your family is important? So how do we let them know where you're going to be coming and what we're going to work on and what do you need from them and what do you need from us? It's like, how do we just treat people like we want to be treated, right? It's so fundamental. It's so basic. And it feels so good. Restorative justice feels good. That's what I want to say. Restorative justice, when you're doing it in a way that is following the traditions and the cultures where it was initially practiced, it feels real good.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to put me in touch with all of those people.
Absolutely.
And we will follow up with this conversation because, I mean, you and I get to have conversations, but I think the benefit of a podcast is that you get to impart your wisdom to hopefully the millions eventually. But for now, the few people who get to listen to these airwaves. Go ahead.
Can I say one? Can I just read what's on your shirt so people know what T-shirt you're wearing?
Yeah. Can you read it?
Yes, I know it, but I wouldn't write. So David is wearing a beautiful T-shirt that was actually printed in one of the printing presses at the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation here in Chicago. And it was made in honor of Aura for the ceremony we had when she passed. And it says, "The wind said, you cannot withstand the storm. And Aura said, I am the storm." And David is wearing it. Probably there's a picture of a woman's profile and her arms are back, feeling the wind at her face and enjoying the storm. So thank you, David, so much.
Thank you, Cheryl, for being with us. To all of you who are listening, there's going to be one more episode launched today with Griffin Castillo, who's a part of the Amplify RJ team. So you can listen to that right now. But for everybody else, take care. And Be well, and can't wait till next time.
Bye.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. Follow us on our social platforms at Amplify RJ, and check out all of Amplify RJ's events and workshops at amplifyrj.eventbrite.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.